Oh, down at the nursing department down
Yeah,
there?
yeah. There's like a huge lab there that's just like it's designed to look like a hospital. So
Yeah.
it's cool because like on the walls you can like turn on like oxygen, and we have like thermometers, like blood pressure cuffs, like everything in the walls, like medical carts, like 24 mannequins with beds, just like all the way around. It's awesome.
Yeah. So pretty much all your classes are there now? Or
Um,
just in the
all-
building?
Right on the set.
Yeah.
Take 5. Sorry, Nigel. Okay. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Nick Greco. And what?
We need to redo that again. Sorry, the gym was a mess.
Okay.
Trying to readjust the height.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Nick Greco, and today we're talking about social media's effects on mental health. I'm joined here today by Dr. Pavone, a psychology professor at Sacred Heart University, and student Josh Bellucci. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I first want to start off with the question, do you think we as a society all too often turn to social media as a way to escape the struggles and complications of the real world?
I think that's a complicated question, but yes, I do think that that happens. But it's a process that takes a little time. You kind of ease into this social media kind of thing, and it gets interesting, and then it gets addictive.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because you always see people, they start off with one social media platform, such as Facebook, and then before you know it, they're on Instagram and Snapchat. So I think it definitely grows.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's as much when I think about for social media. I think it's more to escape maybe a sense of boredom. That's kind of how I view it. So I see a lot of people like before classes or just walking through the halls, maybe waiting for a presentation to start, like these things where there's not really anything to do. So I see social media kind of maybe not so much as a way to escape struggles as much as it is to escape boredom. Just that it's something more stimulating than maybe like waiting in silence to be on your phone. And then like you said, now we have all these other social media platforms. So there's kind of more to do. There's more like likes to check and kind of stories to look at.
So do you think over time, when people use social media during these times of boredom in between classes and such, do you think that it just adds to this addictive use? Like people over time, because they use it so much, it starts becoming addicting?
Yeah, I think it can definitely start to be addicting. I think there's this sense of staying connected with people. I think a lot of the side of it comes with maybe not even staying connected as much as like when people are looking at videos or just looking at stories. Kind of when I think staying connected, I think of talking to another individual through social media. Whereas I think it's often these times where, like you said, I think it is more the addiction than that staying connected part, because it's not these things where you're talking to someone else. It seems like almost these things are just keeping yourself occupied.
Interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that as we move into this new century of communication, it's such a different world.
Yeah.
And the process becomes not only that I want to be connected, but I must be connected.
Yeah.
That's kind of frightening in a way.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've personally read many articles and did studies that suggest that heavy social media use has links to low self-esteem, depression, and anxiety. So, given your specific expertise, and Josh, you can answer this as well, what types of characteristics and personality traits do we start to lose when we start to spend hours upon hours looking at social media?
I think the first thing that's very obvious is that we'd rather text than talk. There's very little face-to-face communication anymore. And I think that given the ease with which you can communicate through social media, it becomes easier to just become more introverted and express yourself online rather than sitting down across a table and talking to one another. So the characteristics of depression are, oh, I'm not as good as so-and-so, or I'm not as strong as. Anxiety is, how am I going to get through this? You know, I can't do things the way that other people are doing them. Look at how they are doing. And that process, the comparisons of one person to a group of other people tends to add to the depressive quality. And then the low self-esteem comes from, well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do what they're doing. And the problem there is that you don't know if they're telling the truth online, because everybody wants to make themselves stronger, better, bigger. And so those are the things that the comparisons are primarily what causes the depression, because you always think that you're less than.
Yeah, I would have to say that heavy social media use, we become a community or people, if you will, that use social media, and we start to become worried about what other people think. Like when somebody looks at our profile, what are they thinking? What do they think about us? Do they like who we are? Do they not like who we are? We start to become so concerned with what other people think as opposed to just being ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a huge side of it. I know there's people who maybe won't post a certain picture to Instagram if it's similar to a picture they posted maybe last week, or they might not post, like you don't post two pictures in the same day. So I feel like there's kind of this whole, almost like, I don't know if political side of it, but there's definitely kind of like an etiquette, I feel, with social media. And then going off of your idea with depression, there's this idea that I actually read about, I think it's interesting, it's known as Facebook depression. And the idea for it is you spend so much time comparing yourself to the highlights of other people. So for example, like people don't post an ugly picture of themselves when they first wake up in the morning. They post like a great vacation they had, maybe with their significant other, these like happy times, and that's all you're seeing when you go on Facebook. A lot of the times you're seeing these snapshots of how amazing somebody's day or their week was. And I feel like that over time, when you're looking at that multiple times a day, over and over for like a long period of time, and that's what you're seeing, exactly like you said, with that anxiety and the self-esteem, that's like, why don't I have that? Why, like, isn't that me? So kind of striving for this thing that's not really realistic. Like, I think a lot of times, like, social media is an idea of self-expression, but is it like authentic expression? So there is a way to express yourself with social media, but is that like your true self with these pictures you're posting and comments you have? So that's something that I think is kind of interesting for it, and I think people might not understand when they're looking at social media, is that what that person's portraying might not actually be how their life really is, or at least not on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense that, like you said, people are posting whatever they think is going to look good and other people will appreciate, and so they create this persona online, and over time, when after looking at these pictures over and over again, they start to lose sight of themselves, and they start to think that this persona has to be them. They have to live up to what they look like on social media, and so I think they try to promote that, and they try to almost go negative against who they really are, and they try to demote their regular personality and characteristics that make them who they are, because they strive to be this online persona that everybody else is going to like.
Exactly, and I feel like that takes a lot of effort to live up to that persona, especially if you're getting hundreds of likes on Instagram, let's just say, to pick a social media platform. But I know people too, if they might get concerned if they don't get a lot of likes, or their story doesn't get a lot of views, or like maybe they don't get a lot of shares on something that they thought was funny, like retweets. So there's this idea too of not only expressing yourself, but also this idea of acceptance by others, and that other people want you to find you funny, and they want to like your picture and think you're maybe just that something you did, a vacation, was really cool, or just whatever it might be depending on the social media platform. But there is this heavy idea of acceptance with others. I think it can be kind of nerve-wracking if you're not getting that acceptance that you kind of want through those platforms.
Yes, I think so too. I agree. So given what we just talked about, why do you think that people still continue to use these platforms? Why do they still go back to them? Do you think it is something to do, like you said earlier, they have to feel connected, they have to feel like they're part of the community, and if they don't use social media, that they'll be left in the dark, so to speak?
I think it's that lack of connection that they're worried about, but we use it because, like with any other tool that we have at our disposal, there's pros and cons to the use of social media. Social media can enhance our lives, and it really can help us to connect with people of like interest. And it can help us to help others, like the GoFundMe pages, to get a movement going, very much like what's going on in Florida at Parkland after the terrible shooting. What we found is that the young people at Parkland went on social media and got a movement started around the country. This is a very powerful and worthy tool. However, if we find that we would much more be comfortable on social media than talking face to face, than looking people in the eye, then we're losing part of our own humanity in that way. And I think that is one of the downsides to using social media, heavy social media use. We use it because we need to, number one. Number two, if you are not available on social media, you're going to lose out on opportunities that other people. We know that employers, when they're looking for hiring, they go on your social media page to see what you've been up to.
Yeah.
And some people have lost the opportunity for a really good job because of some stupid picture that they posted on Facebook. Be aware.
Yeah, and that idea for if it does make people feel this way. I think it can make people feel this way, but not necessarily everyone who goes on social media has these ideas of anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Like we said, I think that's with an extreme, with an imbalance, you can have those. I think one of the things that's very interesting surrounding just technology in general, I like the science behind stuff. So every time, like your phone, when you get the beep or you get a buzz or a text or the sound goes off, it releases a chemical called dopamine. So everyone knows it's like the feel-good chemical. So when you get a text, it feels good. And same thing when you get an email, when you see like your phone ringing. So they're designed with that addictive property to it. So there's a great speaker, his name's Simon Sinek, and he talks about this. And dopamine's also released with these actions like drinking, gambling, these addictive qualities that everyone knows are addictive. They're designed for that way because companies make money when you go on social media, when you go on your phone, and when you go on Facebook. So that was like a design question when they were designing like the iPhone was, do we have it beep every time? Well, yes, because you get excited and you see that and you want to check it. So you keep going back to it because that dopamine feels good. So I think that science side of it, for exactly like you said, that addictive property, like you might feel compelled to stay connected with others, like you said, and you miss out on opportunities, which I think is exactly correct. And especially I know in my generation, if you like don't have social media and staying connected in these ways, you are like left out. Like that's kind of the norm at this point. But I think that science side is interesting too, where like companies design these devices to make it so you want to keep going back dozens and dozens of times a day.
Yeah. Now, I think that adults obviously make their own decisions. They choose what platforms they want to use and how much they want to use them. But I think a main point of discussion to talk about is children's use of it. Do you think that heavy social media use can have an even worse effect on adolescents than adults?
Oh yeah, I think so, because it's such a vulnerable time. Adolescents are at the point where they're moving away from their parents and into the real world. And as young people, as adolescents, they're always comparing themselves to someone else because they're trying to figure out, where do I fit? Where do I belong? How do I belong? What am I supposed to be doing? And this is also a time when they push away from their parents in a way that says, I need you, but I don't need you right now. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like this push-pull kind of experience that they have that says, I really want to be with my parents, but you know what? I want to see what everybody else is doing. So this separation from their parents, this joining with others is a whole different experience for them. And with the generation that's coming up, I can see that this sense of I have to be liked. I have to be admired. And if they're not feeling that, it leads to some significant depression and anxiety, because you make the assumption erroneously that I'm the only one who feels this way, because everybody else on social media is feeling so much better than I am. And because of that, there is this disconnect with the self, and that's problematic for young people.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to be made, that people always, like you said, want to be liked by other people in regards to social media. And with social media, you're only seeing only the good. And I think over time, with heavy social media use, we start to think that maybe these people's lives are really just good. There's no bad side. And so I think we start to play mind games with ourselves in a sense, and it can really mess with our psyche.
Yeah, and in terms of for whether or not it can affect adolescents more than adults, going back to a belief that I have is I think it's the imbalance that's the problem. So I don't think social media is inherently bad. The same way I don't think cars are inherently bad, even though there's obviously negative sides with car accidents and deaths, but it's the way that they're used, and there is a negative side of it, but I don't think that's social media's inherent fault. I think it's the imbalance, and there are negative sides depending on how it's used. So I think adults and adolescents can both kind of succumb to that imbalance, and that's when you have these negative these effects that can happen that we've talked about. But I think one thing that you mentioned is this idea in adolescence with self-acceptance and wanting to kind of attain that, and then even apart from that, acceptance by others. So I feel like adults, a lot of the times, they might not become as sort of, if you want to say, addicted or have these negative effects, because I feel like adults have a more kind of this more kind of formed idea of themselves and how they are as a person, whereas adolescents might not have that. So I think because of that insecurity, like you said, possible insecurity, but I think that's prevalent a lot. These kids can turn to social media for that because it's kind of like this coping mechanism for this stressful time, like you mentioned.
I think, again, too, is that we have to recognize that social media, the internet, all of these marvelous advances in technology, they're tools. And we control tools. We can't let the tools control us.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Okay. Just one more question, my final question. Now, you said we talked about some of the positive aspects.
Start this question over, please.
Yeah. I've read that some of the positive aspects of social media use include self-identity, self-expression, community building, and emotional support. Now, we talked about the imbalance with how social media is used. Although it's not inherently bad, there is a problem with how it's being used. So do you think there could be a healthy alternative to achieving these type of things, such as self-identity, self-expression, and such?
Again, like Josh said, it has to do with balance. But there are marvelous ways to use social media to form connections with people with like interests. And that's a very positive. You put you in connection with people. For example, if you are a cyclist, you get on social media and you type in long-term cycling. What you get is a bunch of people who like to ride bicycles all over the place. So that's using it as a tool to be connected with people of like interest. And then you hook up with those folks, and, well, hook up is probably the wrong word, but you get connected with others that you can form relationships, but person to person, not through the screen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, and I think that's where, with a lot of these discussions with social media, kind of how I've had before this one, whereas is social media good or bad? And somebody might say bad, but then somebody talks about these ideas of getting connected, or you mentioned the march that's going to happen due to with the Parkland shooting, and how everyone's going to come together, and that's going to be a national thing. So you would never be able to have that if you didn't have social media. So in those kind of situations, I think it's an incredible tool, but it's a tool, like you said. So kind of going back to this idea of kind of like self-expression, I think that's kind of where those dangers sort of come from. But I think it's a great tool for those things. So I think it all just comes back to kind of how we use it. So with these discussions, a lot of the times, it's not like it's good or bad. So I feel like people, like, if it's not black, it's white sometimes, and people want to know, is social media good or bad? And I don't think there is a right answer to that. I think that's just something to really just be aware of. It's all in how you use it. If it's for situations like you said with getting connected and like hooking up with people, I think that's like a great way to have it. But I think it's knowing what those negative sides and the ways to use it are too.
Thank you both very much for joining me.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Huh?
Just like thank them, say their names.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pavone, and thank you, Josh Bellucci, for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Media Matrix.
This has been a Media Matrix presentation.
Nick, if you could just talk to the two guests real quick.
Yeah, sure. So we got a lot done there.
Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you very
we
much,
did.
both.
Yeah, those were great questions that you came
They
up
were
with
really
today.
Thank
good
you. Yeah, great
questions.
answers too.
Yeah,
Did a
Thank
really
you.
good job. I appreciate it. Appreciate you doing all the research and just coming in.
Yeah, I was glad Dr. Pavone asked me when outside of class. She had mentioned that she was involved with this, and
Folks.